Good morning, I'm Patricia, and I'm the host of the Poetry Pcast. Right then, tea's made, biscuits are at the ready, I'm having a little oat bicky. What are you having? And today we're going to dive headlong into the world of Fujiwara no Saide, better known, thankfully, as Teika. Yes, Teika. Not a brand of herbal tea, although equally nourishing for the soul, but one of the greatest Japanese poets of his age. And before you roll your eyes and mutter, "Oh, here she goes again, more ancient poetry," let me reassure you, this chap wasn't just scribbling flowery words by candlelight. Oh no. He was laying down poetic lore, teaching his apprentices, and occasionally having his family forge his work, although that did happen after he died. Quite the legacy, don't you think? But before we get stuck in, a gentle reminder to you, don't forget the latest video prompt, which this month, if you're up to date, is being edited by the marvellous Nina Singh. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. It's the sort of thing that makes your muse sit up, stretch, and demand another cup of tea. So as I said, I'm going to be talking about the poet Fujiwara no Saide, or Teika, as I'm now going to call him. He was from a family of poets, and we're going to hear some of his father's poetry today, as well as his. And his descendants were also heavily involved in the poetry scene of their time. And as you know from listening to this podcast and this reading you do, poetry in this era was a very serious business, with established rules and language. Teika, who was not just a poet, but a teacher, produced many pieces of work in his time which pronounced on the techniques of poetry. And I think they're going to be useful to all poets, not just those of us who write in the Japanese short form. But perhaps I should pause at this point and bring you a couple of examples of his work. The Traveller, sleeves flapping in the wind on an autumn night. How lonely the bridge across the gorge. The Traveller, sleeves flapping in the wind on an autumn night. How lonely the bridge across the gorge. Fujiwara no Teika, translated by Philip Morel. Day will dawn, and we will pass beyond the midpoint of fall. But will the setting moon be all that we lament? Day will dawn, and we will pass beyond the midpoint of fall. But will the setting moon be all that we lament? And that Teika poem was translated by Stephen D. Carter. In the many decades following his death, his family, as I alluded to, apparently forged work purporting to be by him in order to bolster their own standing as masters of poetry. So you're never quite sure which pieces of teaching were his or forgeries. But there have been studies which try to authenticate his writing. And it's thought that the document Maigetsusho was, for the most part, created by him. Today's podcast will draw heavily on a translation of that document by Robert H. Brower. So why is the Maigetsusho important? Robert Brower says of it that it's one of the half-dozen most important documents in the entire corpus of Japanese classical poetics. And what we have in this document is in essence a copy of Teika's teaching. It's a letter to one of his pupils who was in the early stages of learning the craft of poetry. In studying it, we gain a grounding in the discipline of waka, which, as you know, was the forerunner of what we now call tanka. And if you're coming to tanka for the first time, there are some podcasts I've done in the past, details in the show notes, and you can follow those up, and of course the sources that I use today will also be cited in the show notes. So in this letter to his pupil, Teika gives him 10 styles of poetry. Some of the ideas he proposes are similar to ideas that would be found in treatises by earlier poets. And to be honest, you'll find some of the ideas which have been repeated by later poets. But anyway, Brower says that My Getsusho contains classic statements of Teika's original poetic ideals. So, should we take a look at those 10 styles? I think we should. The first one is mystery and depth, which perhaps we would know as Yugen. For help with this, you could go and have a listen to another of our podcasts with the terrific contemporary poet and editor of Bottle Rockets, Stanford Forrester. Again, I'll stick a link in the show notes. I'd like to give you a definition of Yugen. And if you forgive the pun, this one particularly rings true with me. Yugen, according to Robert T. Wilson, is like an echo after the clang of a brass bell. In this world, the way does not exist. Troubled, I enter deep into the mountains, but even there I hear the deer crying. In this world, the way does not exist. Troubled, I enter deep into the mountains, but even there I hear the deer crying. And that was by Teika's father, Fujiwara no Shunzai, translated by Hiroaki Sato. Commentators are not sure what's on the mind of the poet in this poem, and there are many explanations as to what was going through his head. Was it his own personal turmoil about whether to take Buddhist vows? Was it his awareness of his own mortality? Maybe even the dissatisfaction at the state of his world. The Heian period was coming to a close when he was writing this. And thinking about what's going on in our own world at the moment, I'm sure many of us could understand that feeling. D.T. Suzuki says of Yugen that it's an object of mutual communication only among those who have the feeling of it. When you listen, do you have the feeling of it in this poem? In this world, the way does not exist. Troubled, I enter deep into the mountains, but even there I hear the deer crying. Teika's second style was appropriate statement. What that means is that a poem should be composed so that it seems to glide as smoothly as a drop of water rolling down the length of a 5-foot iris leaf. So said the priest Shunhei. I thought that was rather elegant. Weary of the world, I thought to hide myself away in this mountain village, but it reaches every corner of the night, bright radiance of the moon. Weary of the world, I thought to hide myself away in this mountain village, but it reaches every corner of the night, bright radiance of the moon. And that was Teika's father again, Fujiwara no Shunzai, translated, I believe, by Brower. I think when you visualize a poem gliding as smoothly as a drop of water rolling down the length of a 5-foot iris leaf, and listen to this poem, you can see what Shun'yi meant. Weary of the world, I thought to hide myself away in this mountain village, but it reaches every corner of the night, bright radiance of the moon. I think this style of appropriate statement is very similar to the next fundamental style. Elegant beauty, which is characterized by harmony, balance, and beauty of cadence. Beauty of cadence. I rather like that expression. This style, I felt, was difficult to show with a poem translated from the Japanese, as so much depends on the skill of the translator. So I thought I'd use something contemporary rather than one of Teika's examples. And I've chosen these poems. Waxwing winter, all my unsent letters in a wooden box, wrapped in shadows, how you touch me still. Waxwing winter, all my unsent letters in a wooden box, wrapped in shadows, how you touch me still. And that's by C.X. Turner, and it achieved a first place in the Fleeting World Tanka Contest 2024. Wind-swept hill. The smell of summer rain rises with birdsong. The brooding thundercloud seems suddenly far afield. Wind-swept hill. The smell of summer rain rises with birdsong. The brooding thundercloud seems suddenly far afield. And that's by a fellow Swiss, Benjamin Blazy. And it got third place in the Fleeting World Tanka Contest 2024. And if you're on YouTube, you can have a look at these poems. The short, long, long lines do, I think, give a balance to the poem. And when you read them out loud, they have that beauty of cadence. And consider the topics. If you think about the topic and the language they've used to express their poetry, they're in harmony with each other, aren't they? So, Teika's fourth style was deep feeling. And he explains that the greatest waka should not merely display technical polish or cleverness, but should be animated by a deeply sincere emotional core. He used the word ushin, conviction of feeling. And I think he meant that the poem must carry an authentic, intense inner emotion that compels expression. It's not enough to imitate old styles, pile up elegant phrases, or master rhetorical devices. Without that conviction, that ushin, the poem can feel hollow. But be aware, at the same time, Teika insisted that this feeling must be disciplined and shaped by craft, so that the raw emotion is elevated into beauty and resonance. So probably, I think, when Teika speaks of conviction of feeling, he's saying that the great poetry arises from a union of true, deeply felt emotion with poetic technique. That your reader should sense both the sincerity of heart and the refinement of form. And Teika used this one to illustrate this style. O jeweled thread of life, if you are to break, then break now. For if I live on, my ability to hide my love will most surely weaken. O jeweled thread of life, if you are to break, then break now. For if I live on, my ability to hide my love will most surely weaken. And that's Princess Shikishi, translated by Dr. Joshua Mostow. And a little side note for you here. Teika also says that this style is fundamental to all of the others. Fine poetry, he says, has been said to be possible only when every poem is suffused with deep feeling. Although he does mention that it's particularly useful when writing love poetry or grief, expressing grief. Now, these first four of his styles are the fundamental styles that you should look at first, he says. And when you've mastered them, you can move on to the more difficult styles. So, should we go and have a look at those styles too? The fifth style he called the lofty style, a method of achieving grandeur and elevation. As the coming dawn pushes open the gate of heaven, from behind the clouds, still streams the splendor of a moon radiant since the age of the gods. As the coming dawn pushes open the gate of heaven, from behind the clouds still streams the splendor of a moon radiant since the age of the gods. And that's Fujiwara Yoshitsune, translated by Brow. But, a word to the wise, don't go overboard. We don't want, to quote Teika again, over-elaborate or contrived poetry. You could lose the emotional deep feeling if you try too hard. The sixth style is visual description. Both Brower's translation notes and Jane Reichold speak rather disparagingly about this style, saying, "This is a rather bland style, emphasizing visual description and imagery and often containing no subjective or emotional statements." It's a bit rude. I've heard folks say similar things about Shiki's sachet or sketch of life, haven't you? And again, if you're not sure what that is, there are podcasts about that. But it's basically writing the scene which sits before you in order to give your reader an insight into what you're looking at. Like this poem. As evening falls through the rice plants before the gate, it comes visiting and rustling on the reeds of the simple hut. The autumn wind does blow. As evening falls through the rice plants before the gate, it comes visiting and rustling on the reeds of the simple hut. The autumn wind does blow. And that's Minamoto Tsunobu, translated by Dr. Joshua Mosdown. I possibly might translate this a little differently. We all have different styles of translation, don't we? But anyway, in this poem, the poet is sitting in front of a villa in Umizu, which is now a suburb of Kyoto. But at that time, way back in the 1100s, was in the countryside. So not only do we get a beautiful scene from the poet, but as readers of a different age, there's a little bit of historical geography in there, which makes me very happy. The seventh style is termed clever treatment. So that's a witty or ingenious treatment of a conventional topic. And Taker quotes this example, again, I presume translated by Brower. Though it was only I who came out into the garden, leaving footprints in the snow, will people think some visitor has brought comfort to my loneliness? Though it was only I who came out into the garden, leaving footprints in the snow, will people think some visitor has brought comfort to my loneliness? And that poem was Archbishop Jian's. The eighth style is novel treatment, a little bit like the previous style, it's true. But this time we're using an unusual or original poetic conception. And Teika quotes a poem by Fujiwara Motozane, which gets that treatment on the theme of love. A river of tears floats my body off on its current, but it cannot quell the fire you have set in my heart. A river of tears floats my body off on its current, but it cannot quell the fire you have set in my heart. Fujiwara Motozane. This time translated by Jane Reichold. The ninth style, exquisite detail. And this style is indicated by exact and precise details with often complex imagery. So, quite a difficult style to get right. 1,000 things overcome me with their sadness as I gaze upon the moon, although the autumn was not meant to be felt by me alone. 1,000 things overcome me with their sadness as I gaze upon the moon, although the autumn was not meant to be felt by me alone. Oi no Chisato, translated by Brower. And this poem strikes me as a little overcomplicated for today's taste in tanka. However, it does illustrate the style. There's certainly symbolism and imagery, even though we as modern-day Western readers might not get it. Contemporary readers, and perhaps current Japanese readers, would understand it better. But that doesn't mean we can't write in this style. I have a more modern poem, which I think might illustrate the point. I'll forget I saw you standing with a stupefied look, hands holding your breasts, when an earthquake shook this morning. So bring me a drink, my dear. I'll forget I saw you standing with a stupefied look, hands holding your breasts, when an earthquake shook this morning. So bring me a drink, my dear. And that was Tekan Yosano, writing in the 1800s. And lastly, one of the most difficult styles according to Teika, called the demon quelling style. Creating poetry in this style, the intensity of expression is so fierce that it feels as if it could drive away demons. So this style refers to poems whose imagery or treatment conveys an impression of violence, for example. And that's quite contrary to our expectation of the gentle nature poem we're quite used to, or the melodic cadence of that love poem. That's probably why Teika suggested we don't have a go at it until we're proficient at the other styles. Its key features then would be emotional intensity. Unlike the refined subtlety of his yugen or ushin poems, these verses will burn with urgency, anger, or grief. And you'll find that the diction and the rhythm is quite harsh too. The language sometimes breaks unexpected elegance, giving the verse a raw, almost violent force. Have a listen. From the vast sea, the waves encroach in thunder upon the quaking shore, breaking, smashing, riving, falling in great sheets of spray. From the vast sea, the waves encroach in thunder upon the quaking shore, breaking, smashing, riving, falling in great sheets of spray. And that's Sanetomo, translated by Brower. And that's the end of the 10 styles. A lot to mull over and practice, perhaps. Next week, I'll do some more thoughts from Teika on the writing of waka, stroke tanka. And I'll give you some exercises, which I'll check out myself this week, see if they work. And we'll look at some more contemporary tanka to get you in the mood to write. Because next month, again, if you're listening in real time, we're writing tanka. And there we have it. Teika's 10 styles, from the delicately melancholic to the full-on demon-quelling thunderclap. Not bad for a man whose family couldn't resist cheekily forging a few extras in his name. I do hope you're going to have a go at one or two of the styles yourself. Though, if you do attempt the demon-quelling sort, best warn the neighbours first, in case they call the police when they hear you reciting this violent poetry out loud. That's all for now. Do make sure you check out the video prompt. Again, if you're listening, watching in real time, it's lovingly curated this month by Nina Singh. It might just nod you towards writing a superior poem. But till next time, keep experimenting with those styles, and remember, a self-consciously fancy verse is, as Teika would say, a big fat no-no. Well, he might not actually use those words. I'm sure he'd be much more eloquent. So until next time, keep writing. And remember, there are links and sources in the show notes for you to follow up if you're interested. Ciao!